So I have a few questions to start off. How many of you have tried virtual reality? Okay, that's a sizable amount. How many of you tried either an Oculus or HTC Vive? Okay, that's half of you guys. So I assume the other half of you tried something like Gear VR or Google Cardboard. So today I'm talking to you as someone who is still in the process of doing a startup, and I don't have a lot of experience that I can share because, who knows, I might be giving terrible advice. What I'm going to be sharing are data that I've learned about, no shots fired. What I'm sharing are data that I've learned about the VR industry and what I know about what I do, and hopefully that's something valuable to you guys and to the VR enthusiasts in the room. So the title of my presentation is Shorting VR, which kind of doesn't make sense because I'm in the VR industry, yet I'm betting against VR. And this is a bit of a clickbait, I apologize, and I'll explain why it's a clickbait later. And let's look at some data first. So what do we know about virtuality as of today? So this is what we have for the year of 2016. And on the right side, you can see the number of units sold for VR devices in 2016. There's about 250,000 for the Oculus, 500,000 for HTC Vive, 750,000 for the PlayStation VR, which was a pretty big disappointment. And last but not least, you have the Samsung Gear VR and the Google VR stuff, which is very popular but offers much lower quality virtuality experiences. So this is the data. These are the numbers. It's very objective. There's not much to them unless you provide some context. So right now, there are kind of few perspectives on how VR is doing. There are the optimists who believe everything's going great, VR is going to blow up, just like promised, and they have their arguments. So they think technology is still in infancy stage. Some people would like to claim VR is dead, but the argument is that how does the technology die when it's still a baby? So that's what they're comparing to. And one solid example they're using is the adoption rate of the iPhone. In the first year, after the iPhone got released, they sold about 6 million units. And in the year 2016, which is considered the first year that commercial VR became available, the Gear VR device sold for about 5 million devices, which is pretty good if you do the comparison. And that's a valid argument. For any new technology, you have to give it some time to adapt and improve to reach a point of mass adoption and commercialization. And a lot of people believe that mobile VR will be the future because in contrast to your Oculus Rift or HTC Vive, mobile VR is convenient, it's cheap, it's accessible, anybody can use it, and it's much more useful in terms of being a functional device instead of just an entertainment device. And that's also a valid point. Just to give a little bit of context, this presentation is mostly about VR entertainment, so the points that we'll be making and my opinions are going to be about VR entertainment, not the VR industry as a whole. And this is a slide I took off the Business Insider Intelligence, and I find this slide pretty funny because they actually only have 2 real data points for 2015 and 2016, yet they projected all the way up to 2022, and it looks like a pretty simple graph that I would make for my business classes at Laurier. But for the optimists, this is how things will look for the next couple of years and the next decade, and they have good reasons for that. VR is a huge industry. There are plenty of applications outside VR entertainment, so this is very possible. Now, on the other side of the fence, there are the pessimists, and these are the guys that fundamentally believe there is something wrong with virtuality, and this is a technology that should die. And I've talked to people who believe this. Most of the time, the reason they believe is because they've tried a very bad VR device or just a terrible VR experience that made them really nauseous, really dizzy, really uncomfortable. And this is kind of what the optimists are arguing against, is that people who think VR is not ready and VR is not good is because they haven't really tried a good VR experience. And the comeback that the pessimists have is, well, good VR is so expensive, to afford to buy a full VR device or VR system at home. It'll cost you at least $1,000, probably more like $2,000, and who's going to be able to afford that? So they don't think that VR is looking good, and they also have some data to support their points. One of the data points is for July and August of last year, the sales of Oculus Rift and HTC Vive, which are at the time, the only two commercially available high-quality VR devices, their sales flatlined for those 2 months. Zero growth almost. And for any new technology, this is sad when your sales is not picking up at all as promised. And this is kind of a big warning sign for the investors as well. So I think I skipped over it from the last slide, but the investment that went into the virtual reality industry tripled from 2015 to 2016. And as you might all know, there was a lot of talk about virtual reality, a lot of hype, both in the consumer space as well as in the investment space. So besides the optimists and the pessimists, there are the opportunists. And these are the guys that are looking for opportunities. And I belong to one of these groups. And just to be clear, the opportunities I'm addressing right here is not the only opportunity, it's the opportunity that I see and Mirage VR sees, and that's in location-based virtuality. And to explain that in simpler terms, it's basically arcade 2.0. So in the old days, we had arcades that people went to experience, console games and just gaming in general, because console gaming machines and computers are not affordable yet. So we are kind of at a similar stage for virtuality where the technology is so expensive that no one is able to afford a good VR system. And that's where location-based virtuality jumps in. And it solves a couple of the fundamental problems that VR is facing right now. Number one, the price. So when you have a location-based business that offers VR as an experience rather than a product, you're offering a service that's affordable. You don't have to take ownership in the product, you just want to try it. And second, accessibility. Nobody has the space, the ideal space to set up your own VR system at home to enjoy a really good experience. You might get a couple of square meters to have an okay time, but you don't really have too much space to play around with. So having a customized environment where the developers and the business can customize experience to the likings of the customers really adds a lot of dynamics to the experience. And last but not least is the premium factor. Whenever you have something offered as a service and also is customized, it tends to be higher quality than what you can usually afford, which is a cheap Google VR, a cardboard, or a Gear VR device. Now, there are also bad things about this industry, and I'll address them in a bit. Let's see if I have the slides that I don't have the slides.
My bad.
No worries. So I want to give a couple examples of what location-based VR looks like. So one local one is Control V that I think a lot of us have heard about, and they've been doing a fantastic job at introducing people to virtuality. And they're kind of one example of the location-based VR, and their business model is quite simple. It's basically, you don't want to purchase the VR device, so why don't you come into our store and we'll rent the devices for you, to you, and you can try the experience. And it's great because people don't have to buy it. There are also other customized experience providers such as IMAX as well as The Void. These are the bigger guys who essentially created an entire environment that's in virtuality that's not anything you could try off from a game you buy off the Steam store or the Oculus store. These are customized experiences made for the customized environment, and you go there to have one basically once in a lifetime experience, and it's really great. But both of those kind of have their own problems as well, and I think they're both attacking those problems. And the two main problems are scalability and sustainability. So one thing I'm sure you guys all know is that arcade industry is dead as far as we know, the old arcade industry. And the reason why is that their business model wasn't quite sustainable. As soon as commercial gaming consoles and computers became available, there's no reason to go outside to enjoy a VR experience. And the second part is scalability. When you're location-based, you're really bound by location, as any location business owner would say. It's location, location, location. And there's a lot of, compared to a software company, there's a lot of uncertainty and risks involved in having a location-based business. So these are the two problems that every location-based business is trying to tackle. But at the end of the day, I personally believe that VR has a very bright future. I do believe it's going to take a couple more years for the technology to evolve to a point where it's able to reach every single consumer in their homes. But I also believe that the arcade industry for virtuality is not going to have the same future as the arcade industry for the traditional gaming, because VR is so different that it creates an entire reality for you. And even if everyone owns a VR headset at home, there's only so much you can do. You're still constrained by space. You're still limited by isolation. You can't have a group experience. And that's where location VR comes into play. Imagine there's a place you can go to with your friends where a group of you just gets to enter a completely virtual environment, and you can actually interact with each other in that environment. And this is kind of contrary to what Facebook is creating as a social VR platform. For example, when we think about social network nowadays, it's all virtual, it's online, right? Whereas location VR, it brings social back to what it originally was, which is everyone coming together virtually and physically and enjoying an experience together. And another missing slide is a picture that I took off the washroom wall in Velocity. It's a great place, the washrooms in Velocity, if you have time you should go visit, because there are these inspirational quotes. So whenever you want to, you're feeling like you're lacking in energy, just go to the washroom and stare at the quotes. And one of them says, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And that I want to conclude my presentation on that note, because no matter where VR goes, at the end of the day, it's up to the makers and the builders to build experiences. And I believe that as long as it's a good experience, there's always an audience who's willing to try. And that's what we're doing at Mirage VR. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. All right, any questions?
Right here, closest.
What do you think about the potential of augmented reality versus virtual reality? And are these going to be two different industries, or will they merge?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So AR is something I haven't touched upon at all, and AR is a huge industry on its own. But I think currently AR is not at a stage where we can have actually thoughts about it that's backed by data yet. Because if you look at the AR space, there's just so little AR device that's been out. The only one I think is HoloLens. And we're hearing news about Magic Leap and Meta, but we just don't know enough about AR, and I'm not an expert in AR. But I do think AR and VR will have an intersection. I don't think that will encompass all of VR, but there's definitely an area of intersection where the two will merge and create something interesting of its own. Yep.
So what's next for VR then, in your mind?
What's next for VR? Mirage. What's next for VR? So VR has just started, really. It's hard to say what's next. It's more like what first. Not even everyone has tried VR yet, so it's hard to say what's next. Personally, I believe that location-based virtuality is really going to take off in the next year or two. You'll see a lot of business popping up that offer VR as a service in their own ways. And I do think good quality VR is going to take some time to take over the market, and mainly due to two reasons, right? Number one is price. With any hardware, it always starts off being very expensive, and it's the same case for VR. The second is content, and the content is a little more complicated because it's like the chicken and egg problem. Does the content come first, or do the hardware become massively adopted first? And it's hard to say which one will happen, but from my own perspective, being a developer myself as well, a lot of game developers, and I would say pretty much everyone I've talked to, has either already done VR development on their own time, or is very interested in doing VR development. So everyone is willing to jump into VR and start developing content for it. And I think what we're waiting for is really for the price to drop to a point that enough people buy it to give more reasons for developers to make more content.
Yep. I know there's a few more questions. We're going to have to move on for time, but if you're sticking around for a few questions after, then...
Sure, yeah, I'll be sitting right here, and feel free to drop by. Thank you.
All right, thanks, John.